Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. A ton going on this week, but we're going to end up talking some same old favorites, including James Harden, the Houston Rockets, and inexplicably McDonald's and the White House. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me most places as Nerd Numbers, and with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian. Say hey.
What's going on, Dre? Yeah, boy, we got 2 shows in now in January, and the NBA is getting crazy. There's some pretty good games coming up this week.
Oh, yeah. Again, day late and $1 short. The box scores of the week are late again just because I get behind on the weekends. But don't worry, those are still coming, although it's weird because I'm apologizing in real time on a show that's going to be released after. So if in the future you went, why were the box scores of the week a day late? I'm apologizing for it now. But, you know, it's interesting. And I will say one of the players that made the list this week is James Harden. Another one that I really liked was actually, I don't think he did. I'm sad about this. So a player that didn't make it that I'm depressed about, Brian, is Nikola Jokic, the best big in the NBA. So I'm gonna talk about the first segment of the show, Brian. So to keep people in the loop, what we've decided to start doing is around the NBA, where Brian and I do some lightning topics, and then we do some bigger topics. And so this week, the big topics we're going to discuss is a rehash of a study we keep seeing that we're going to talk about, the wrong way to judge metrics, including some of our thoughts on the wins produced metric and the current state it's in for the current NBA season. And then we're going to talk about Donald Trump and the White House, because why not? But for the Around the NBA, Brian, not this week certainly, but I was thinking something we could do to make that segment more normal is when we're on our game for the week, if you and I just throw all the topics we kind of want to discuss bullet point, we could do a draft of it where we just go in order and basically because sometimes you have a really good topic that I really like that obviously I'd rather talk than my own even. So you could do with the first round of the draft, so-and-so picks. This week I would say probably not, but in future I'm just throwing that out there as an idea. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we can draft any of these topics whenever we want.
Let's give some shout out. For those that don't know, big friend of the show, Art Rondeau, shooting coach extraordinaire that also loves the Knicks. We had him on a while back to talk about shooting, of course, and free throw shooting, because that's one of his extraordinary abilities, is to help coach players to do that better. And we actually asked him about DeAndre Jordan kind of on the spot on the show. That's what you did, Brian, because DeAndre Jordan shot really well. Art basically said he hadn't at the time really reviewed DeAndre Jordan, so he didn't have an informed opinion. His only kind of side insight to it is that there is a coach that works for the Mavericks that had worked with Art in the past, and Art said if he was using some of the same techniques that he knew that coach was aware of, that might have helped out. But what Art said after the fact to us in email, we won't reveal too much, obviously, but he just said he didn't expect it to keep up. He said he didn't think DeAndre Jordan was going to keep shooting from watching the game, from actually seeing what he was doing, and says that has become the case. If you recall, at the beginning of the season, he was shooting like 80% plus from the free throw line. He is now down to 68.8% as a season average, and as a downhill trend, I think he's in the 50s for January. So do just have to give a shout out to Art on that, because we basically put him on the spot. He didn't get to answer that directly on the show, but then after the fact, he's like, yeah, this isn't going to hold up, and it is not holding up.
Yeah, to be fair, though, he did say that he still looks confident, and so he hopes that he does keep it up. But yeah, it's tough to double your free throw shooting percentage in one season. That's not an easy task. So even for him to, let's say the number we were throwing on email was 60% when he's down in kind of the mid to low 40s for his career. If he can stay above 60% for the season, I think that's easily the work he put in is going to be worth it.
Yeah, there is actually, we're going to talk about about metrics in general and like tipping points and stuff about what's valuable to winning. And you do basically run into the fact that there is a cutoff. It varies based on league average. So this is something important, and we will discuss in the future. But the NBA is a zero-sum game. So when we talk a player's stats, you really can't do it. I get to sound like a normal pundit, Brian, in a vacuum. Right, Steph Curry's shooting is amazing this season, but you could argue it's even more amazing relative to the league he's in. And, Steph Curry's shooting in, say, the 1980s would break the league, right? If he was shooting as well as he is now. I think we mentioned this with Joel Embiid, which is funny because you'll see people that bring up stats like Joel Embiid is the first player to do blah since, Shaq or Wilt or whatever. And the unfortunate difference is, to be a productive player in the modern NBA means you have to be better at things. Did you just cut out, Brian? Or?
No, I'm still here. I was letting you finish, but no, I agree. And in fact, I remember last season, which was Porzingis' rookie season, and he was getting a lot of hype. I was looking at his numbers and I was thinking, man, his overall, his combined numbers like ADGP or ADJ, I'm saying it wrong, or WP48 at any rate, that seems lower than his individual numbers should be. What's going on here? Are we shortchanging him a little bit? And then eventually Patrick pointed out to me, I think he said, look, there's just inflation, right? You have to shoot really, really well to be an above average shooter these days. And Porzingis just didn't do it last season. So there you go.
Yeah. If every single Major League Baseball team suddenly has a player that gets a home run, the value of home runs goes down because you now need to get at least one to do better. And that's happened. So, the tipping point to being an effective free throw shooter does vary in the league, but you do need to be above 50s. And so that is the key to DeAndre Jordan. Even if he's in the high 50s, low 60s, he has still gone from a tipping point where our numbers would have said before he was essentially losing points. As weird as that sounds, right? Because you kind of have to, you were saying keep pace with inflation. That's also important in the NBA. If every single play up the court, the Warriors shoot a three, and it goes in 100% of the time, and every time up the court we shoot a two, that goes in 100% of the time, those would both be ridiculous games, right? At the end of the game, your 100 twos that went in, we'd be like, holy cow, perfect shooting from the field, but you'd still lose because you have to keep pace with the opponent. So if you're shooting below, I think 52% from the free throw line, you're basically not keeping pace with league average if you want to be a productive player.
And does that matter for him specifically? Because then they can get into hacking, basically, right?
And yeah, and once you remove that too, I think way back in the day, I released a post when he was with the Clippers and Chris Paul and said I thought he was an MVP candidate, and noted that the only place he was weak kind of was like free throws, even though his overall scoring was really good. But the key is, as soon as you get rid of that weakness, he's like strong on all fronts. So, yeah. And then, the weird when people make the weird offensive claim, they're like, it's like playing 4 or 5 on offense or he doesn't shoot enough. It's like, well, he still gets offensive boards and can still make easy shots. So, and we've said the funny note about that comment, make easy shots. It is not easy for most players in the NBA to get easy shots. It's not, you're not allowed to just go right up next to the hoop. If you were, everybody would do it. So even the players that get up right up next to the hoop 5 or 6 times a game and shoot 80% from that, most players can't do that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite posts ever on Wages of Wins or Boxscore Geeks, and it was by you about just how few Tyson Chandlers there are out there. You have to look at a lot of seasons before you can find anyone like that. Patrick, it was Patrick. Okay, sorry, Patrick.
He did like the Play Index Plus, where basically he looked and said, hey, if people could do this, everybody would do it. And I think that's also a key thing to make, is that, and we've said lots of times in the NBA, it's players know certain things get them paid or, attention, whatever. So they want to take shots and they want to make points. So it's not as if they're just saying, and then Patrick has also used that same bit of logic to the weird, they just stuff their stats in garbage time. That might actually be true, but the problem is, everybody wants to do that. It's not as if when the game is over, the bench players on one team go, let's all stuff our stats, and the bench players on the other team go, the game's over. Let's just go and do nothing and get zeros on the stat sheet and not get picked up by another team.
Yeah, and I'm showing DeAndre Jordan's year-by-year stats on Boxscore Geeks right now. And he definitely is that kind of, Patrick Tyson Chandler type of player. He's very steady, getting, around between 9 and 11 shots a game every season, which is, or I should say per 48. Sorry, that's a big difference, which is, a lot lower. You expect a higher volume shooter to be like, say, 20 or more, attempts per 48. But then again, he's shooting 67% from the floor this season. And this is very hard to do, but also very valuable despite that number of shots.
All right, let's get into our Around the NBA topics, Brian. Let's talk SRS, because this is what Brian always checks in on this. Basically, SRS, for those who don't remember, simple rating system. It's a basketball reference. You are using point margin with strength of schedule. And in a normal NBA season, basically the upper bounds are plus 10 to minus 10, which is how much you would expect a team to outscore an average team, essentially is what that's saying. And what has happened, unfortunately, since we last spoke, Brian, is that the Nuggets have now been passed in SRS by the Golden State Warriors. What was funny, though, I'm gonna be this fan. I'm starting to get real Denver-y, Brian.
Good.
My enthusiasm cannot be contained because they're playing that damn well, and Nikola Jokic is an MVP caliber player. They had a 1-1 back-to-back against the Phoenix Suns and the Portland Trail Blazers. What you would normally say about that, and Arturo's looked at this when you look at back-to-backs and back-to-backs at altitude, is the Nuggets were supposed to go 1-1 in those two. They were supposed to crush Phoenix, and then they were supposed to lose at home to they were away, but Portland has an amazing home court advantage. They're supposed to lose away at Portland, and they lost at home to Phoenix and then beat Portland. So they got the outcome I actually would have expected on that outing, and it was actually a preferred one because obviously Phoenix is doing nothing, right? There are no tiebreaker scenarios that matter between the Denver Nuggets and the Phoenix Suns. The Phoenix Suns are also in a different division. So it is much better for the Denver Nuggets to have racked up their win against Portland than Phoenix, but it's not supposed to have happened now. But I'll give it to that. But basically, Denver losing to Phoenix Suns dropped them below the Golden State Warriors. So that's heating up. And I think like for dominance of the division, they are playing tomorrow night, and whoever wins that game will be the first place in the division after the game.
Yeah, that's a great summary. When we looked at this last week, all these teams are very tightly clumped here. And yeah, Golden State's moved slightly ahead of the Nuggets. And Golden State's been beating up on some pretty bad teams, Dre. Like, I think the common threads for my comments about them all season is I just think they're playing really well and have really good lineups, but they're still not winning all these games and things have been tough. And I think they've just been playing against good teams. Not been true the last week or so. They had the Knicks. They had all these other Eastern Conference teams.
Actually, can I get a dig? This show might be a lot of digs against, depending on how the segment goes. But they played the Chicago Bulls and beat the tar out of them. And then the Chicago Bulls played against the Utah Jazz, and like Donovan Mitchell had a good game. One of our favorites to bash on the show, and I can't remember who. There's a player on Utah that it may have been Joe Ingles, who like taunted the Chicago Bulls after making a shot, and they won by 8. And I was like, you don't get to taunt the Chicago Bulls for winning by 8. This is one of the worst teams in the NBA and one of the best squads out west, the Golden State Warriors, just beat the crap out of them. You are not this is not supposed to be a game. You're not supposed to be playing the fourth quarter. So you don't get to say, oh, we're awesome for beating up the Chicago Bulls when the Golden State Warriors are like, yeah, missing a leg, we destroyed them.
Yeah, that's grade A trolling. Right there. But yeah, so now the Warriors are slightly ahead of the Nuggets, and the Warriors are looking a lot healthier than the Nuggets. They will not have Cousins back yet. His first game will be Friday, so that'll be exciting for them.
Who are they playing?
It is the Clippers. Yeah, It is the Clippers. So that'll be fun. And the Nuggets, I want to say Jamal Murray and possibly another player may miss tomorrow still.
Oh, interesting. So Murray was back and played good one of the games and bad one of the others. Gary Harris has been slowly getting back in, but he is not 100%.
Oh, that's what it is. Harris has missed 4 games, right? That's what I'm thinking of. It's Harris who may not play tomorrow.
And we're still missing Will Barton, who's one of our, or actually he might be back. So Will Barton has been out for. So I mean, we've talked this before, and I just want to reiterate it. If we look at the Western Conference, for the first time in a long while, it is the most clumped it's ever been, with the Denver Nuggets and the Golden State Warriors both being on top. And then I made this tweet today, Brian. I'm pretty sure you saw it and enjoyed it. Oklahoma City Thunder is third. I noted that the top of the West, the best teams just aren't healthy. The Nuggets, like I said, they've been missing Will Barton most of the season. Gary Harris has been in and out. Paul Millsap as well. Golden State Warriors, right, still haven't gotten DeMarcus Cousins back, have lost some Curry, lost some Draymond. Oklahoma City Thunder, Robertson isn't back, and who knows if he'll be back this season. And then Noel, did you see that, by the way? Just kind of like a shout-out, hope he's okay. Did you see the Nerlens Noel get elbowed in the head by Andrew Wiggins and go down? It's just really hard to watch.
I did see that, and I liked and retweeted a comment against that, which was appalled that it was not a foul. Like, that should have been a flagrant 2 against him for elbowing Noel in the face. That's ridiculous. Someone
noted that too, that Carmelo Anthony got suspended out of a game for doing that once. And then additionally, I mean, it gets even more in poor taste where Andrew Wiggins had one of his own, one of the 5 good games he's going to have in the NBA season. He had a good game that one. Now, of course, he knocked out one of the best defenders on the Thunder doing it. And then, like the Minnesota Timberwolves were tweeting out after the fact, they were like, Andrew Wiggins is, mayor of Oklahoma City. It's like, I found that an extra poor taste. It's like, yeah, if you injure an opposing player, even if you have a good game, your PR staff should not be tweeting as if you did something good.
Oh, I didn't know about that. No, that's absurd. I mean, I can't read his mind, but it looked like an extremely dirty play to me. If you were going to deliberately elbow someone in the face, that's exactly how you would do it. It does not look accidental to me. So Noel could have died on that play. I'm not joking. Like, if you fall from that high in the air and hit your head on the court, you could have died.
I said it was one of the hardest. Like, I try not to I still to this day have not seen Sean Livingston's injury or Paul George's, the ones that put them out for a long period of time. And I'm probably not ever going to watch it down. But then, basically, like, he gets knocked out in the air and just falls and hits his head on the ground. It looked really bad, and I hope he's okay.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Like, I wish that had happened differently and the league reacted differently.
Yeah, and I made fun of the NFL and said, in the NFL they would have put him back in the game and said he was fine and he passed the concussion protocol. So, another thing. This could have been a topic on its own, and I might treat it as such, Brian. So if we go a little long on it, so Houston is interesting, Brian, because Clint Capela, I believe, tore a ligament in his thumb and is going to be out 4 to 6 weeks. And then you actually noticed something astutely, Brian, which is rough but true. Eric Gordon is coming back soon, and that is not a good thing for the Rockets. And Chris Paul is still a ways from return. And then, of course, don't forget they picked up Austin Rivers.
Oh, yeah, and what's his name? Brandon. He's not playing very much, fortunately. Yeah, it's rough. And just kind of a general thing that I like to talk about is that losing a star player or adding a really, really bad player, that doesn't get thought about as interchangeably as it should. Like, adding Eric Gordon is almost as bad as losing a star.
Oh yeah, actually, well, let's note that together. And I've got a weird point about why Clint Capela hurts more than people think. So you can go to the playoff comparison engine at Boxscore Geeks, one of our favorite tools to use, and I'm going to put in James Harden and like you just said, Eric Gordon. And I think this is useful for a variety of reasons. So to what you're saying, let's use the points over par metric. Reminder, points over par, we're translating a player's production into the expected point margin against an average team. Oh, wow. It's even so, Brian, you were more right on the money than I thought. In fact, impressively so. I'm going to give you no prize or whatever for the week, standing ovation while sitting down. It's not like a Yogi Berra thing. James Harden, points over par per 48 is a plus 4.9 this season, which means he's giving basically a margin of 5 points of victory to his team against a normal opponent. Eric Gordon per 48, negative 5.6.
I didn't think it would be that bad, to be honest.
It is. So when you say, this is what's interesting to me. You just said adding a player like Eric Gordon can basically negate a player like James Harden. Now, to be fair, Eric Gordon has been better than this in the past. I did not realize how bad. Like, basically, Melo left and Eric Gordon was like, oh, you're missing one of the worst players in the NBA. I'll take his spot. Because he has been better than this historically. But yeah, Eric Gordon on his own is negating James Harden. Now, to be fair, like in the past, instead of negating James Harden, he would be like negating half of a James Harden. Something that's been odd to me watching it is James Harden's been playing amazing. And I'm going to compare him to a player we might talk I know we're going to talk a little more, is Donovan Mitchell. James Harden's been playing great, but he is getting. So let me make sure I control this. I do think James Harden, if we put the normal constraints being like on a playoff-worthy team, James Harden is an MVP caliber player. And actually, yeah, the numbers support this. He is 11th in the NBA right now in total wins produced. So he is definitely an MVP caliber player, but when we compare him to some of the top players in the NBA, he is not at the same level. And part of that is he is doing really good at scoring this season, but for instance, his turnovers are really high and he's volatile. So it's one of these interesting things where I don't think Harden is as good as people think he is this season, which is rough because he kind of needs to be if they're going to compete. And then the hard follow-up to that is that they just lost Clint Capela, and I think Clint Capela on that team is massively underrated. Yeah,
I mean, they're replacing him with Nene, who's, not bad at 36 still pretty good, but that the depth is the even bigger problem, right? It's not like they have a second Nene to back him up. So they had two bigs and now they just have one on their whole roster. That's tough. Like that's going to be really bad for them. So Chris Paul might be back in 2 weeks at best, so they could, still make a nice playoff push, but it's going to be a tough few weeks.
It's the really rough part is I think because of his scoring output, and for what it's worth, it is quite good. 61.7% true shooting is remarkable. But like I said, the problem is like last season, for instance, he was 61.9%. So he's shooting a little more and keeping his efficiency the same, which is great. But that team has had some good players like Clint Capela, like Chris Paul, like when he can shoot, like actually, if you only have him make threes, Eric Gordon. And so the problem is him shooting the same percentage. Enes Kanter is out this Thursday. If he's shooting the same percentage, then it's not really helping things out as much as you would think, especially like he is just not. I like him as a ball handler. I thought that was a brilliant maneuver on Mike D'Antoni's part, but his turnovers are ridiculously high.
Yeah.
So it is just a case where you can basically say, he's not as good as people think, and we think that Clint Capela is the best player on the Rockets, and it's not even close. 10 wins produced, plus 7.3 points over par. So essentially what you're saying is let's assume, hypothetically, Eric Gordon returns and he's rehabbed, and he's only as bad as he was last season. Well, but with that and the loss of Clint Capela, they're basically saying they're negative 9 points per 48 minutes on those two players now. The difference, and I mean, I think let's take a look. Nene is not good. I mean, Nene, back in the day, he was really, really good for Denver. I really liked him on Denver, and he was one of these players that just couldn't stay healthy, and then at one point he got healthy, and then he got testicular cancer. And
I forgot about that.
He got through it. It's all good, but it just got ridiculous, to the point where, it was like it wasn't even his on the court injuries. It was like he was getting off the court injuries that were ridiculous. He's negative 1.2 points over par because he's, a below average center because he's 1 billion years old. So essentially replacing Clint Capela with Nene and bringing back Eric Gordon, that's a negative 10-point swing to a team. And what's their SRS at the moment, by the way?
Good question. Let's go back over to Basketball Reference here. I want to say it's below their record, that they're kind of getting a little bit lucky here.
2.62. So, I mean, essentially, we're saying that kind of turns them into the Phoenix Suns. No joke. So they are in trouble. And I tweeted this out today, too. I said, basically, if they make the playoffs, James Harden is MVP. It's that simple. I think if Clint Capela is out for 2 months and Chris Paul, that's another part. You said Chris Paul back in 2 weeks. Chris Paul has not been playing like himself either this season. So
it feels like he's been playing dinged up, huh?
If Chris Paul doesn't come back healthy and Clint Capela is out for 2 months, this team might just be out of the playoffs, which is remarkable for a team that was, a win away from a title. Let's be honest. They would have even if that team had lost James Harden and Chris Paul, I think that team still could have beaten the Cleveland Cavaliers.
I mean, stuff could happen. Well, I mean, you're right about that, but they definitely would have, I think. But, I mean, stuff can happen here. PJ Tucker can, return to his old self, maybe. At his age, you probably don't expect that, but it's possible.
Well, we think an issue, there's two funny issues with PJ Tucker. And we've kind of talked this a lot with some other players that we like, players like Danilo Gallinari, is that we think PJ Tucker is a fine small forward and he's getting played out of position. Yeah. And then we also think, I do want to keep shouting this out. I think we've already talked this before. The Houston Rockets letting Trevor Ariza walk is almost unforgivable at this point. You could have maybe, I'm trying to remember, a few years back when they picked up Trevor Ariza, they let a guard walk. It might have been Chandler Parsons or might have been another guard, I'm forgetting, or small forward. So I think the season they let Chandler Parsons walk, they picked up Trevor Ariza for less. And so you say, you know what? That's completely fair. And, we've had this kind of point on players that we like Tyson Chandler or Robin Lopez, who I think we're going to talk to, where we go, when their pay increase gets high, you can probably let them walk, and there is another one available for nothing. Case in point example, everybody missed on him and they're fools. Nerlens Noel. Nerlens Noel went for nothing to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Right? BS, if you're a team that is in need of a good big, you couldn't have offered Nerlens Noel $6 million a year this season and gotten him. So there tends to be that. So I can forgive that. But they let Trevor Ariza walk and they didn't replace him with anything. And I think there was an article I think you brought to my attention, Brian. It was about like the revenue. I think it was it Tim? I think what's his last name? But he's a reporter, and he might have written for The Athletic, but was talking about the revenue of the Golden State Warriors in the playoffs.
It's probably Tim Kawakami.
Yes. And then I think that's right. I'll try and look it up. I may not.
He is with The Athletic now. He was a long time, Bay Area newspaper group writer before he moved over. Long time Warriors beat writer and whatnot.
But it was tens of millions of dollars for playoff revenue. And so I think the Warriors, if every round of the playoffs, especially now with modern NBA and stuff, is worth so much money that to essentially let Ariza walk over what amounts to $7 or $8 million for a single season, when if he helps you get another round of the playoffs, it's worth it. It becomes even more unforgivable.
Yeah, and that number was compared to the last leak number we had, which was from the Nets like 5 years ago, right? And so it was a big upgrade from that number, and we were a little surprised on that.
The difference is the Nets were a playoff team in a market. If you look at the Forbes numbers, New Jersey was never really that big of a basketball fandom, even when the Nets were doing good with Jason Kidd. So their revenue numbers suggested that each additional playoff game was worth like $1 million in gate revenue. But that was, again, we're talking about the Nets almost 2 decades ago at this point.
Oh, is that old? Okay.
Yeah. Whereas with the modern Warriors, that was why I was really interested in the article, and I'll have to try and look it up, where they were basically saying, we're like I said, we're talking tens of millions for a single series. I think it was the finals. That's the hard part. It's the Warriors in the finals. That's worth a ton of money. But I've got to imagine the Houston Rockets, a series against the Warriors, right? If they can make the the Western Conference Finals, that's worth a ton of money. So it does get hilarious to me to watch these basketball teams. Our favorite thing that we bring up all the time about James Harden is when you crunch the numbers, the cap hit that the Oklahoma City Thunder would have had to endure would have been $4 million for the next season. And I mean, and one of the things that gets interesting to me, as an example about Chris Paul, when Chris Paul signed with the Rockets, Dave Barry astutely noticed that the contract, because I think it's 4 years, $100 million, somewhere around that ballpark, he said, Chris Paul's not going to be worth that. We really can't expect him to keep up that production, which I agree with. But there is nothing that says that next year, if Chris Paul is healthy, that Daryl Morey can't go up to, let's say, the Washington Wizards and say, I'll give you Chris Paul and draft picks and some money for Satoransky and Thomas Bryant, which I think would be an amazing fleecing. We've seen that happen a lot. Like, there is no unmovable contract in the NBA. So I think that's another thing that people forget when they go, if he'd signed James Harden, he's on the hook for all this money over the years. You go, you can restructure contracts or move players or do whatever in the upcoming season. There's nothing that says, oh, we're going to be over the cap in 2 years with our current roster. Well, it's really a shame that we can't do anything to alter our current roster the next 2 years.
Yeah, they could have tried using that Gordon money to pay Ariza or something like that. They did successfully move Ryan Anderson, of course, so yeah, I mean, that could have happened. I wonder if they came into the season saying, we're just going to get Carmelo Anthony, so maybe he's just going to take over Ariza's role. Like, if that was their thinking, that was a huge mistake. But yeah, I mean, they're going to have to make some moves, right? So who else, what centers do they actually have now other than Capela? They've got Nene Hilario. They've got Isaiah Hartenstein, who's listed as a center, but I've seen him play. He's not very big. So they're probably going to have to go get another center, right? Like, PJ Tucker is not going to play center for him.
I've seen some people and I don't know if they're real rumors or just speculation, like they're saying what I would do is, I mean, first off, Thomas Bryant, if the Washington Wizards are asleep at the wheel, grab Thomas Bryant. Oh my goodness. And I think I've seen some other people saying, go to New York, like Noah Vonleh, Kyle O'Quinn. I think New York has some ones that if they're not paying attention.
Kyle O'Quinn went to the Pacers this offseason.
That's right. Yeah. But I did see someone say, well, I don't think the Pacers would be dumb enough to do that, but maybe. I mean, the Pacers have seemed pretty savvy. And it's funny where at this point, I mean, he's playing fine. He's not playing the same levels he was playing for New York.
He hasn't been getting as many minutes, right? Which seems weird, but
he's an above average big for the Pacers. So, I mean, maybe I've yet to see the Pacers seem to be winning trades as of late, but maybe that wouldn't be a bad one either. So, yeah, I think you're right. But the problem is watching how the Houston Rockets have done this last season. Carmelo Anthony, Michael Carter-Williams, Austin Rivers. I don't think I have faith in them doing a savvy move. Now, that being said, if there is a GM that just routinely does a savvy move that keeps breathing breath into this franchise as it's declining, it has been Daryl Morey, but I just don't know if there's another star available on the market for him to get.
He really gets in and out of our doghouse, doesn't he? Like, one year we'll like him, the next year he won't. This is definitely a down year for him in our book, I think.
Well, I think he epitomizes the key of the NBA, which we bring up all the damn time. And to a degree, we used to even bash ourselves as metric heads, which is the NBA is such a Pareto principle league, meaning the top 10 to 15 players really do dictate the success of the NBA. And that's not hard, right? If we look at every single team that's the top of the, so watch, it's just not even hard. Denver Nuggets have Nikola Jokic. Golden State Warriors have, I almost said James Harden. Maybe he'll become a Warrior, Brian. They have Steph Curry and Kevin Durant. Oklahoma City Thunder, Russell Westbrook, and this season, holy cow, Paul George. Portland Trailblazers, Damian Lillard. Out east, Toronto Raptors. Now, we think he's underrated in regards to this, but you would say, and we agree, Kyle Lowry. And then, of course, this offseason, Kawhi Leonard. Milwaukee Bucks, Giannis, of course. Indiana Pacers, what is it? It's Oladipo. Who's the other? Do they have another? Who is the other star on the?
Oh, yeah, they're a little more balanced.
Actually, no. They need to give him minutes. Like, I think the Indiana Pacers are underperforming because if you look at Sabonis, he is just remarkable. He's a big part of their secret sauce, actually.
And also Darren Collison is still playing solid for them.
Yeah, but DeMontis, I'll try and just make sure. That sounds right. I'm pretty sure that's how you say it. But DeMontis Sabonis is just a star big for them this season and leads them in wins produced. And then, of course, and actually Victor Oladipo has kind of dropped a little, but yeah, they've got Sabonis and Collison. So there's that. And then, of course, the Philadelphia 76ers have Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, and then Jimmy Butler. So the top players in the league dictate the success. And so the one thing that Daryl Morey has been good at is every, like I said, 4 or 5 seasons, he manages to make a move for one of the top players in the NBA. And it's funny, if you have a GM that does that, so like Daryl Morey, to clean up the Houston Rockets, if one of us, lucked into control of the team, it's not hard to just say, Eric Gordon, you're gone. I'm going to find a way to flip you, right? It was funny. The trade you mentioned last week, the Michael Carter-Williams one, was fascinating. And this didn't really register at the time because I hadn't read this aspect, but you brought it up in the show.
You've got a new take on that trade.
Well, no, what you said, right, is they went up to New York and said, we will give you money to take Michael Carter-Williams. But the way it worked out is
to Chicago.
Sorry, not New York. I don't know why I was thinking New York. Went up to Chicago and said that. But the way it worked out, right, is they were going to get a cap hit with Michael Carter-Williams. So by paying a team to take him, they basically saved that money. So even though they paid that team money, they saved money, which is a weird way of phrasing it. So, but there are all sorts you can do stuff like that in the NBA where you can go up to a team and say, you have this player on contract. You're over the cap, right? So maybe you have a player that's $15 million. You go up and say, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We'll give you our $10 million player for your $15 million player. We'll give you $2 million too. You give us the guy back and you waive the guy, right? And you save money. So it is one of those cases where the Houston Rockets are a much easier team to clean up than, say, if we got control of the Cleveland Cavaliers or New York Knicks or Chicago Bulls, where you go, oh my goodness, you guys, even if we like some of your young players that look promising, you guys have so many potholes. We're going to have to fix so many positions before we even get you in playable shape. Even, the Phoenix Suns, we really like DeAndre Ayton, but they have DeAndre Ayton, which means if you take them over, you're going to have to fix a lot of things. Whereas the Rockets, you just trade away Eric Gordon and you sign one decent shooting guard and you're good. So that's the problem, is that in the NBA, the GMs that do well are the ones that can get stars. So that's why even if maybe the stat heads, I think Dave Barry, when he was looking at the number for Pat Riley as an example, he said Pat Riley as a coach doesn't really seem to impact player performance compared to other coaches. So we're not saying he's a bad coach. We're basically saying he's an average coach, right? He is irreplaceable to another coach. But as a GM, he has routinely found ways to get or keep stars on that team. Hassan Whiteside is an example. We thought he was gone and he stuck around. So we kind of think that's more valuable than a lot of the analytics, especially some of the bad analytics that make it to front offices.
Yeah, and I'm hearing some terrible takes that I need to subtweet someone on whose name I'm forgetting. I only subtweet people when I forget who they are. I never do it on purpose. But there is a Phoenix area writer in the last few days who said that not only were the Suns wrong to take Ayton over Doncic, they should have known at the time that this was a mistake and done it. And there's two problems with that. Number one, no one should know how the draft's going to turn out. It's a crapshoot. And number two, it actually did turn out well for the Suns. Doncic, I think, is probably easily the second best rookie, but Ayton is far and far above him right now. So that's ridiculous.
Well, and by the way, it's gaining. So I will actually say the following.
He looks pretty good.
look at the trend, like, because I mean, basically, here's how the season started. DeAndre Ayton looks like close to a star level player, right? 200 wins per 48. Luka Doncic looks average. And what we would say is an average playing as an NBA average player as a rookie is incredibly impressive, right? So we give it to him. And then I was even saying, I was like, well, he'd probably be my sixth man, right? I would be fine with Luka Doncic as my sixth man. I'd be fine with DeAndre Ayton as my starter. But if you've watched the trend, like the rolling averages, Luka Doncic is just going up. And what I'll say is,
sure.
I'm just going to say, like, look at the two right now on Boxscore Geeks. I think they are much closer than you realize at this point.
But here's the question, though, Dre. If I'm Mark Cuban and you're the Suns and I say, I'll offer you Doncic today for Ayton, straight up, do you make that trade?
No, of course not.
Of course not. No way. No way. Ayton's much more valuable at this point.
No, I'm saying, well, okay, so first off, the scenario you just presented is you're on the wrong side, but I don't think you quite realize what you're saying is Luka Doncic is 19 years old. Luka Doncic was picked with the third pick in the draft. So that means, one, Luka is cheaper than DeAndre Ayton already, and two, he's younger, which means his upside is higher. Just for comparison, Luka Doncic's wins per 48 at the moment, according to us, is 178. So he's a points over par, 0.25, plus 2.5. DeAndre Ayton wins per 48, 226, points over par, 4.0. But like I was saying, he was basically that at the beginning of the season when we were comparing it. Luka Doncic was average. So that means Luka Doncic has been getting better. Last season, when I saw some people with Ben Simmons and Donovan Mitchell, they were trying to make a similar point. And I looked at the numbers, and basically Donovan Mitchell did not really improve that much over the season. He just had occasional spikes that went up and then, of course, went from being a bench player to a starter, whereas Ben Simmons actually exploded. So I think, Brian, there's a chance that Luka Doncic ends the season more.
Ends the season, yeah. Sure. I'm saying right now, though.
But I'm saying even right now, I wouldn't. Right?
Oh, I disagree. Okay, that's fine.
I think their rolling averages put Doncic over Ayton. But what I think is a bigger key on this is that you're not a loser in either of those cases, right? Last season, if I say pick a hand, and in hand one I have Ben Simmons, and in hand two I have Donovan Mitchell, one of those hands makes you a contender. The other hand, I'm like, damn it, I have to find a shooting guard. Whereas if I say DeAndre Ayton or Luka Doncic, either hand, I mean, arguably that can turn your team into a contender depending on how good they are.
I definitely agree. If you're talking about those four players, Mitchell is by far the least exciting of the four. That'll give you.
Let's give a shout out. Just this, I haven't read the article, Brian, but Paolo Uggetti, I think, or Uggetti, I don't, as we mentioned, we're bad with name pronunciations, but over at The Ringer, this is just an amazing title, so we have to give credit. It's with Atlas injury, James Harden has officially become Atlas. I agree with that, and I don't think it's really hard. I think people underestimate how hard it is for one player, especially in the modern NBA, to carry an NBA team. So
yeah, no, I agree, and that's why I included this article. It's kind of funny to think about, but it's true, and I think this is why Kobe Bryant got so much credit. You know, the shooting curve, and not the shooting curve. What is it called, Dre?
Skill curve.
The skill curve. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. And that's kind of ridiculous, but it still is very difficult to do what Kobe did. So I'll give him that.
Oh, I'm going to leave that tangent alone. Just leave it alone for now. But say, I'll just raise my objection. So in cross-examination, I can rehash it and say Brian is wrong about Kobe.
No. What I'm saying is doing what he does is difficult, but it's bad for the Lakers.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. And whereas actually James Harden is the other way, where it's what I'll say is it's actually really good for the Lakers. But I'm just saying we've been talking this about team construction. And saying, and I always call it the Brian bins of productivity. You basically have to you either have to destroy a category like rebounding or defense, or you have to be good at, and Dean Oliver made the four, you could even use the four factors if you want. I would probably break them out a little differently, but that's the point. And James Harden absolutely crushes the scoring category. And I'm going to leave the defense category alone, but I'm just saying, even with that, basically he's as good as like 3 average NBA starters. And especially when you have some of the players they do, it's like you'd really need James Harden to be as good as 5 NBA starters to carry that team to the playoffs. So if it happened, I'm really looking forward to see what happens with the Rockets this season.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right, Billy. Let's talk the players of the week a little. Okay, so the 2 players that won Player of the Week, I'm I'll give some credit to one of them, Brian, because I did happen to look over him for this week, but it was Kawhi Leonard and Donovan Mitchell. Now, here's what I'll say. Kawhi Leonard made my top 5 box scores of the week. He had the most efficient shooting game of the week, and he has been playing amazing. And I haven't checked his box score Geeks numbers in a while, but I believe he is playing quite well. Donovan Mitchell, I will actually say, he's playing amazingly, Brian. 0.7 points over par for 48. Donovan Mitchell is still not only a below average player, a negative wins producer. So this gets even funnier because we're talking points over par point margin. You can have a negative point margin and be a positive wins producer in the NBA. And kind of the explanation is when we're saying below average, right? A team that had a point margin of 0 would be expected to win 41 games in an NBA season. So if your point margin is below 0, you're still going to get some wins. You're just going to be a below average team. A negative wins producer actually means that you are so bad that you are costing not only are you hurting your team's point margin, you are hurting your team's point margin to the point that you are costing your team's games, which, by the way, is about negative 3.3. So as soon as you're below a 3.3 point margin, you're starting to cost your team games. Donovan Mitchell is not a good player. Now, this last week, out of 4 games, he actually did have 3 consecutive good games. So I will give it to him. Player of the week is effing bullshit, especially being like, even if you were going to try and give credit to the type of games Donovan Mitchell played in that week, that's the same damn conference as James Harden. Like, if you were going to go for a score, James Harden has literally been just like blowing the wheels off the skill curve, as you called it, this last week. And as I mentioned, the only reason he's not better is like he's got really high turnovers. And he did just have a game where he went one for 17 from 3, which was he was actually still above average that game, Brian, which is remarkable. I don't understand how Donovan Mitchell won Player of the Week. I understand completely how Kawhi.
I do. Do you want me to quote here from NBA.com?
Let's go for it.
Scoring 30 or more points in 3 consecutive games is the longest streak of his career. So there you go. He scored 30 points 3 games in a row on 48.4% shooting. And
by the way, I know he got it in the first half tonight, but I know James Harden was going for like a Kobe streak. Literally meaning there was a streak Kobe had of 30-point games that James Harden was gunning for. And as I mentioned, he already had it tonight. James Harden, let's see if I can count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 30-point streak of 15 games. From the 25th to the 3rd, he had a streak of 5 40-point games. I mean, if you were going to, there's no reason Donovan Mitchell, in the conference he's in with how some of the people in that conference are playing, there's no way in hell he should have won that award. But you know what? Whatever, NBA.com. I will say, that's the bar we've gotten to with Donovan Mitchell. If he plays 3 above average games, people are giving it to him. And I was looking at it. What's worth noting, and at the start of the show I was talking this, where the Golden State Warriors just blew the wheels off of, I don't even know if that's an expression, Brian, but just decimated the Chicago Bulls. Donovan Mitchell's 3rd good 30-point game was against the Bulls, where they won by 8. The game before it was against the LeBron-less Los Angeles Lakers, who just lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers, one of the worst teams.
That game was pretty good for Mitchell. I'll give him that.
And well, it was a good game, but I'm saying it was a good game. It's against a horrible team. Yes. So, and at the start of the season, this happened too with Donovan Mitchell, where he was looked okay after 4 or 5 games. And it was against real teams, he played horribly. And against bad teams, he played decent. And that's the same point where I'm in now, where I'm I keep saying this because I did bash him a lot last season. He is a below average NBA player, but he's young. And there's nothing that says he doesn't become good. But I am not going to say because he played above average against a couple of bad teams that he is suddenly good. And to put him above James Harden for that same week is ludicrous.
Yeah, that sums it up well.
Okay, so I had not seen about this, Brian, and you actually explained to me because I saw some, it's funny when you're following Twitter and you see some chatter about stuff and you don't know the subject and you're like, I'll look into it later. I saw some people saying that the buyout rules in the NBA are probably going to change because you are saying the Bulls refuse to buy out Robin Lopez so he can go to the Warriors. That's bizarre, seeing as they basically just gave Jordan Bell to them for nothing, and then granted Jimmy Butler to the Wolves for nothing. So I guess they're like, enough is enough. Robin Lopez is where we draw the line. But do you have more? Because like I said, I don't have more info on this. But it is interesting to say, obviously, he doesn't want to play for him. He wants to go elsewhere. And for whatever reason, they don't want to let him do it.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. The Bulls are probably tired of getting this reputation for just giving players away.
Then
It seems like they do want to try to trade him, Robin Lopez, now. But go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, then stop. Like, if you didn't want the reputation, and well, that's the thing. The other problem with Robin Lopez is, I think, if I recall, this is what we've talked about before, where I was saying, you get an above average player like Trevor Ariza, and then if Trevor Ariza asks for a raise, it's more than fine to let them walk if you replace them. And there are I have not looked in depth, but I am sure there were players that the Rockets could have gotten that we would have thought were suitable replacements, even justifiable. Like, we do think go for a veteran. Like, I don't think replace Trevor Ariza with a second round draft pick that we think is a top 10 draft pick that went undrafted or something. But that being said, there are replacement players. Robin Lopez is $14 million a year right now, which is way higher. Now he's an expiring deal, which is also good. So it is just saying, I can see saying we want to trade him. I just, I don't know the value to many teams. And, at best they can maybe hold the Warriors out for like a second round pick and give them back like the money they got for Jordan Bell, I guess.
Oh, that'd be funny. But yeah, it seems like this could be a sign of weakness for this Warriors center Moneyball strategy. And by that, I mean, I've accused the Warriors in the past of spending all their money on guards and just saying, well, we're the Warriors, so we'll be able to get all these good big men to play for us for free, basically. And it's mostly worked for them, but they've struck out quite a bit this season. McGee decided to go to, the Lakers instead of the Warriors for the minimum. I mean, you can't blame him there. They should have paid him a little bit more. Tyson Chandler also decided to go to the Lakers instead of the Warriors. And so now here we have, Robin Lopez not able to go there. So they've just been unable to add a big-bodied center so far this season. And to be frank, this article here says Robin Lopez got in a fight in practice because he's annoyed he's not playing enough minutes and wants to be released. Well, if he can't get minutes on the Bulls, he probably can't get minutes on the Warriors. He hasn't played well there any of the 3 seasons.
Well, can I get my my other thing into where I've talked before about Jimmy Butler. I tend to find I'm like alone on an island where people are like, Jimmy Butler's cancerous and gets in fights and all this, and I'm like, I think Jimmy Butler's fine. Can I just say like the same damn thing where it's like, it's a little interesting that maybe it's the Bulls, right? Maybe the Bulls are the cancer. Maybe the bad run teams are the cancers and the players are reacting to their environment.
And to be fair, Robin Lopez is only 30 years old, technically in his prime, and played very well in Portland. And I forget where he was for one more season before he came over to the Bulls. So he's played very well in his prime, just not for the Bulls in his prime.
Yep. Okay. So I titled this next comment. So we're out of the fire round or whatever you want to call it, Brian, the draft. I think like I said, in future, when we're actually ahead of schedule, which if I don't have the box scores of the week out on Monday, I'm not ahead of schedule. We could do like a draft where we have different topics, and then maybe if people want to throw them in the comments or whatever. But I called the next subject, Stop Using Neil Payne's Stupid Study. Now, I like this guy over at Fansided. I just want to get the name right. So it's Ben Taylor. So Ben Taylor at Fansided rekindled a study that I've just hated. And so the basic way is you compare a bunch of metrics, and the test is you look at which metric is most consistent year to year. And that makes literally no sense as a test of any descriptive metric. And then it gets weird because I have to throw the wins produced stat in there and say it makes even less sense about the wins produced metric. So this gets into a weird category. So I'm going to be all over the place, Brian. So feel free to guide me or ask questions or whatever, because it's a big topic.
Do we want to summarize the article at the top first, or how do you want to do it?
That's a great start. Summarize the article up top, Brian, because I haven't even read. I haven't even read this full in depth. But the reason I'm going to bash it is I'm bashing the Neil Payne study, and I keep seeing it get used by people over at Nylon Calculus, now at Fansided, and it's just baffling to me. And we're going to talk about that in just a second.
Yeah, and so that's pretty much what he does, is he notes that Neil Payne did this study, and so Ben Taylor goes and he takes all these metrics, and there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 of them, and it's, mostly these, on-off type of stats that you're going to talk about, but PER is in there as well, also wins produced and win shares and all kinds of different PPMs. And then, like you said, he looks at how variable they are year to year. And does what you were talking about, the retrodiction testing. So that's where I left off, is wondering why should I care how consistent a metric is year to year? Why should I expect a player to play the same each year when their teammates stay the same, even if you control for age and injury and all that? That just doesn't happen, right? Even like you were saying, James Harden is a great example. You said early in the show, James Harden is playing really well this year. He may be an MVP candidate, but he's playing much worse than he did the last 2 seasons, right? No particular reason for that. He's still really good. It just happens. So I was baffled by this article. I didn't understand why he tried to say that this meant how good the metrics were.
Yeah, well, so to explain, if you were looking, and for instance, like BPM is used on here, and even if you're using RPM, it's interesting. So for instance, the way RPM is used at ESPN, so many acronyms, Brian, is it's used as a descriptive stat for the current game, as in, so for instance, at ESPN, you can look at RPM and it estimates a player's wins contribution. And of course, BPM is used the same way, and wins produced, it's in the damn name. The idea being, I take a player's stat and I'm trying to give them credit for what happened in the game. And what wins produced does, and we're going to talk about like some problems, and basically we are in what I would consider maintenance mode of the season. I'm going to give a big shout out to a lot of the sites. One I should say, take a look at Crashing the Glass is a great one. I have a subscription there that I barely use because I don't have as much time as I would like. I did get an email from Ben Falk of it that it was an automated email, and I responded to it and he hasn't gotten back. So I'll give that bit of criticism. Say, if you have an automated email out to say, hey, thanks for using the site, do you have any questions? Feel free to email me back. If someone emails back to that email and you don't respond to the email, don't send out that original email, because this is just through all sorts of shade, Dave Bryan.
He needs an automated reply. He needs some like machine learning type.
Machine learning thing. Just take a cell phone and complete. Oh, funny, just weird tangent of something I heard. You know how they have CAPTCHA? Well, yes. It's not what people have been using to get CAPTCHA is they have a bot that will automatically play the sound version, because that's a version, right, for visually impaired. You can play something that says a sound which kind of sounds whooshy, right? So like we'll say, seashells or something with like it sounds like a breeze in the background. They play that automatically. They send it through Google's voice to text, and I guess Google's voice to text has to also be good about background noise because people use it on cell phones. They send it through Google's voice to text, get the text back, and then paste in the text, and that actually just defeats CAPTCHA. So when you're talking like automated things, like that is funny, where if someone replied to an email, you could maybe just get like an iPhone and just like auto-complete it, right? Some of those are always funny, right? Where someone's just like, I'm really sorry, my grandma died, I'm not going to be in tomorrow. And like one of the auto replies like, looks great. And you're like, wait.
That's so true.
And there have been a few times I'm like really tempted. I'm like, man, I really just want to use the auto reply and see what you say.
I've never used them either. It just feels too cheap.
But I'm saying maybe you could. But to that thing, like we have a lot of respects for sites, like hobbyist ones. One of my favorites too is Popcorn Machine, that keep themselves running during the year. And just to be completely candid, which by the way I've discovered is like a drinking game word. I use candid all the time on the show, Brian. During the middle of the season, I don't necessarily keep as much maintenance. And in fact, I know it's very confusing because we do the podcast. I do very little maintenance for the Boxscore Geeks at this point. I essentially, a while ago, stopped really doing a lot of development and kind of moved full side to just content. But we're at that point of the season where I would actually like to take apart and look at some stuff, because we even had some people questioning things like how center production looks in the NBA. For those that forget, this is my fault too, which is funny because I'm trying to say I don't do a lot to do with it, but this is one thing I did do a few years back, Brian. I did change the wins produced metric that we use at the Boxscore Geeks to consolidate the power forward and center position. As a reminder, what the wins produced does that is novel compared to most other mainstream box score statistics is it compares to position and then compares to league average at that position. So we're basically acknowledging both what we were saying earlier on the show, inflation, right? You have to take into account what is average production in the NBA. How good you are shooting varies greatly, right? Donovan Mitchell, even in Kobe's era, that's what's funny. We've talked about this before. In Kobe's era, Donovan Mitchell would actually be a really good player, possibly even star level. In the modern NBA, we think he's a below average player, at least his rookie season. This season, he's just bad. So with that being said, that's one novelty, and the other is to look at position because we understand that position by position is different. A funny example, one of the writers for the Wages of Wins back in the day, Mosey Platt, he had his own metric, or not metric. He had his own fantasy league that used the wins produced. I believe the win score, right? Because there's a simplified version of the wins produced you can use. We'll talk about some of that too. he used the win score metric, and one of the people that won the first like year or two of that league just recognized that centers were the most valuable. That just get all the damn centers. And so something Wins Purdue says is like, you don't just have all centers. And, you could, in theory, have a team of all Nikola Jokic's, but there just aren't enough Nikola Jokic's to go around. So that's really the way the NBA works is, right, you have guards because you need guards, but then when you're going to look at guards, you compare them to other guards. That's what you really need to do. And when it comes down to that, though, what you were just saying, like the James Harden stuff and all that, what gets really important is you actually have to factor in things like that. Where is the team playing that player? And in fact, the wins produced metric also has two aspects to it, being team defense, and then we also adjust for team assist rates and team rebound rates. So when this article is saying we're looking for year-to-year consistency, it doesn't even make sense for the wins produced metric, because you basically say the team, and I'm not even just saying like if you trade James Harden from the from the Houston Rockets to the Denver Nuggets, wishful thinking on my part. Although, Jamal Murray and Gary Harris for James Harden, Brian. I think that's who says no, right?
Channeling Arturo right now. Whenever Arturo says who says no, that means he's trolling.
What's also funny is I don't have your camera up because it's something with Skype, but I wouldn't have been shocked if you just like quit the show. Then you're like, no, Dre. But the team the player's on, and I'm even just discussing like slight adjustments in team rates, right? James Harden isn't playing next to Trevor Ariza this season. That's different than last season. That kind of stuff is important. So it makes absolutely no sense, first off, to use what we are calling a descriptive stat. And any stat that just uses the box score is a descriptive stat. A predictive stat means I'm trying to predict the future. Year-to-year consistency is useful, and I'm repeating stuff I've said a lot. So when I said stop using Neil Payne's stupid study, that's the rough part, is that the advanced analytics. Oh, by the way, Brian, this is another I'm just tangents all over the place. On last week's show, you told me we should stop using the phrase the Get Off Our Lawn podcast, unfortunately, because Nazis ruin everything. So apparently the leader of the Proud Boys has his own podcast that he calls the Get Off Our Lawn podcast.
Although he left the Proud Boys, so I don't know if he's still doing the podcast. But yeah, we don't want to use that name anymore.
It's the same way that the Republicans have denounced, Shaun White? Am I getting
Shaun White, the snowboarder?
Yes, Shaun White, the snowboarder.
Oh, what would they say about him?
Oh yeah, they're like, the hair or whatever. But King, right? That's the white supremacist. How am I missing the name? In Iowa?
Sean King is a writer and activist.
Steve King.
Oh, Steve King. Okay, yes.
I'm getting names wrong all over the place.
Yeah, he's a white politician who's
white supremacist. Just straight out. It's like, they are. He's left the Proud Boys in the same way the Republican Party has denounced Steve King. That was a Dennis Miller reference that did not even land apologies.
Dennis Miller puts himself in that group too lately, so watch out.
Okay, but just saying that the get off, we're going to have to stop using that. And then also recognizing that sometimes language changes and sometimes you just accept that a term or phrase becomes problematic with how it's being used. So I'll stop using the Get Off Our Lawn podcast nomenclature, Brian. I'm sorry. It sucks. I hate Nazis, but also recognize that I don't want to be associated.
Here's what I'll say. I think we can still say Get Off My Lawn. We just can't be the Get Off Our Lawn podcast.
No, I'll just use another phrase. I'll just say old man. So please, no white supremacist hate groups don't take the old man shaking his hands at the cloud. Please let us have that. So the old man shaking his hands at the cloud with the analytics movement is there have been multiple studies, and this Neil Payne one being one of them, that are not the way to do this. And what I mean is like regression analysis is what, for instance, Wins Produced uses, and in theory the BPM, RPM, and APM metrics use. And the thing is, there have been years of study. For instance, Dave Barry teaches regression analysis. He's a college professor, and he's like written a textbook on it at this point, where you just say that is not how it is used, or that is not what this test means. And like statistics, there are lots of tests which unfortunately the end conclusion can just say this doesn't mean anything, or we can't derive anything from it. And in fact, that's unfortunately the end conclusion with a lot of like on-off box score stats, is that the computer is going to spit out insufficient sample size, right? Or p-testing conclusive. That there have been years and years of study with better ways to do it. And the advanced analytics movement in basketball has these studies that are just wrong, that are just flat wrong, that have stuck around. And just as another fun point to this Neil Payne study, Neil Payne back in the day would quote an article by Dan Rosenbaum, who was, this is interesting. I was hoping I could get a dig on him. Dan Rosenbaum used to be the director of analytics for the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks, we are mocking tremendously for letting Luka Doncic go for Trae Young, which is the most egregious trade since, Dirk Nowitzki back in the day. No, Nowitzki. But apparently he was done with that in June. So I don't know if his work was used for the draft or if he quit that job before the draft. Maybe quit in protest of them not taking Luka Doncic. But there was a bad study done by him that was never published. He tried to get it published, was never published. Dave Barry hosted that study at his, the site's gone down since, but at stumblingonwins.com. He hosted it there so he could refute it in other articles that he wrote that were published, Dave Barry. And Neil Payne would cite this study and link to the Stumbling on Wins site where it was only hosted so that it could exist for people to say how wrong it was. So there are parts of the advanced analytics movement in basketball that are just wrong, that refuse to die. I think Dave Barry had a fun book he liked once, which was just like Zombienomics or whatever. Like it was like zombie ideas that persisted in economics, even though they've been disproven by years of data. And that's all I've really got there, is that year-to-year consistency of a stat is not proof. If you want to make a predictive stat, make a predictive stat. If you are trying to compare a box score statistic that is assigning credit for which players did what, how well it predicts is not the end-all be-all. The how well it predicts does say if you think a player's statistics are skill versus luck. So, for instance, in baseball and football, these are two sports where a player can be one of the best hitters. As an example, LeBron James, if he was a quarterback, we would have no way of knowing if he was going to be a good quarterback the next season. Whereas LeBron James in basketball, he was good last season. We're going to predict he's good next season. But then to predictive analysis, we look at things like his age and injury history, right? My Bayesian priors on LeBron James being good again, because of the fact of his age and the fact that he's now missed several weeks now, right, Brian? I am lowering my Bayesian statistic, but that is not going to be included in any statistic, RPM, BPM, APM. And I just wish this study would die, Brian, but it won't.
Well, so that was a good summary. So, yeah, trying to get predictions out of descriptive stats, clearly the wrong thing to do, right? Is there anything else in there that, people like me who don't understand statistics at all, that you could point out to someone like me?
The honest truth is, I don't actually know. I mean, what's rough is I think a problem about hobbyists is that I think the advice I've given before on like basketball statistics is I think sports analysis is a great hobby to have to let you tune yourself to do other things. As an example for myself, when I got into it, this was basically a nice side way for me to learn databases and web development, which were two things that were good to my field. And I have since gotten jobs in web development and, like databases. I think what too many people do with this as a hobby movement is they treat the hobby as if it is a standard and then try and use that standard. And that really is just the rough part. So to people like you, what I'll just say is, and we're in the same boat, Brian, a study on a blog post study doesn't mean jack. And if you're looking for something, a method that's being used or a study, look to see if there have been like other like standardized methods of it. And you run into problems like we're saying with basketball. It is entirely possible that you find a hobbyist person that's doing some analysis that has never been done anywhere else before, and that's it. And that was kind of Moneyball back in the day, right? Whereas there are things that, as I was mentioning, like regression analysis is a field of study that has been used by many, many smart people and has many, many like standard methods and standard tests, et cetera. And so it is remarkable for me to see people that are essentially using studies that, as I mentioned, like the Dan Rosenbaum study that Neil Payne likes to cite, which was basically correlating metrics against each other, which makes no real sense as a test of a metric. That didn't get published in like the Neil Payne study. It's just a blog. So like if you come to Boxscore Geeks and like what we say, dear God, don't use us as like a statistical primer. Go somewhere else. And I've seen enough, like the creator of BPM at his site has like statistical primers, but when you read over them, you're like, oh, this is wrong. You should read a stats textbook, not this blog post.
So, okay, let me see if I'm on the right track here then. So all the different plus minuses he looks at here, which includes BBR BPM, BP BPM, that's his own version, APM, PIPM, AUPM, And yeah, I think that's all of them. Anyway, I think what you're trying to say is if we were talking about legal terminology, it's like fruit of a poison tree almost. That it's all based on the early work, and that early work was just wrong. So then all these plus minuses that have come since then, we shouldn't pay attention to.
Let us go off on a tangent with you. Can you please explain what fruit of a poison tree means here?
Yeah, that's right. So what it's being used for right now in legal terms mostly is to talk about, and we'll talk about Trump a little bit, but the infamous Steele dossier. So if the entire Mueller investigation is based on the Steele dossier, and the Steele dossier is corrupt or illegitimate in some way, then therefore the entire investigation is corrupt, right? That's what it means. Now, that's not true. That's a lie that people have been saying to try to disprove the, investigation. But that's pretty much what it means. That once it goes bad somewhere, anything else is going to be bad too in the future.
Oh, well, I mean, that is like some funny science things where they're basically saying, based on this assumption, and you just go, oh, that assumption's wrong.
Exactly.
And that's actually very computer science. Yeah, it's like recursion, right?
Yes.
Recursion has what recursion has is two important things. You have a base case, and then you have a step. And so this is one of the most popular examples. I get to pull out some of my computer science tutoring from back in the day, Brian. There's a problem called the Towers of Hanoi. In the Towers of Hanoi, you have these three rings, and you have like a pyramid of rings of bigger size going down. So you have like a small ring, a medium ring, and a large ring. And the question is, can you, moving just one ring at a time and never letting a ring go on a ring that is bigger than itself? So for instance, you can have the small ring can go on a big ring, but a big ring can't go on a small ring. And you can only move one at a time. Can you move the entire tower from one ring to another? It's a logic problem. You can solve this very simply, and what's a funny way of solving it, this is recursion, is you say, I know I can solve it for one ring, right? That's a really easy problem. I just move the ring over. And then you go for a second ring. You go, I know I can solve it with two rings, right? I just do this. It's really both of those are trivial problems that if I gave to you, you'd look at me and go, what, that's simple. And I go, well, as soon as you know you can solve it for one ring, and then as soon as you know you can solve it for two rings, and you know the difference between one ring versus two rings, I can now solve it for an infinite number of rings. But the way you can take apart recursive proofs is if you either say your base case, your base assumption is flawed, or the step you provided is flawed. So that's like a fun, when I was studying computer science in college, there were fun problems like that where people would say, here's a logical proof of like why all horses are spotted or something. And you'd go, and they would say, prove the flaw in the chain of logic that does it. And so your fruit of the poison tree, you're agreeing with us. We're saying this entire post that we're discussing is based on this one study. This one study is wrong throughout the one study. And as soon as you throw out that one study, there's no reason for this post.
That's a good explanation.
I don't really know how much energy I have to. We've talked over an hour at this point, Brian. I don't know how much energy I have to talk about Trump. Basically, Clemson won the big game, right? I forget which bowl. Is it the Rose? Still Rose that's the biggest, or?
They alternated between the four big games now. So it was not the Rose Bowl this year. I forget what it was. Yeah.
Whatever. I do not follow college football at all. So they got invited to the White House because the White House staff is furloughed. Donald Trump catered the event on his own. Maybe I'm going to be really curious to find we're going to find somewhere where he used one of his charities to pay for it or something. Catered the event with McDonald's and other fast food. And I really just, the bigger issue I had here was I heard some of the athletes were excited, and I thought Nate Silver and I had a similar take, which is just like, if you're a college student, getting fast food is fun, actually. And then I saw some other people noting that Clemson, because they are a professional football team, if you say otherwise, you're lying to yourself. They actually have like a nutritionist staff that actually makes sure they don't eat food like McDonald's, because that's not what you want your top tier athletes eating. So this could even be like a treat to them. And all I said is, that's the ridiculousness of, pay your student athletes. It's kind of ridiculous that this should, getting fast food should be considered a treat or anything. I don't really have much more to say. I was going to say the one odd take I had on this is it does get me into the classic liberal area of getting upset with liberals focusing on the wrong thing to be upset about, because this took off
focusing on the style instead of the substance.
Because I don't think there's a problem with the fast food. I think where we can start getting into discussions is clearly Donald Trump was not prepared. Clearly this is how Donald Trump handles things. And we should, like if Donald Trump can't even handle, telling a staffer to go cater a meal for some important guests, we should be worried about what he's going to do when, he's negotiating with real diplomats and real other world leaders. But I think trying to, denigrate the fast food, that was a weird take I've seen. So I think I did there, but I think the bigger thing that was rubbing me the wrong way is like the NCAA athletes and just going, yeah, this is kind of weird. Like, and actually wondering aloud to myself, and I still don't know the answer. If Donald Trump paid for this food by himself, does this count as an NCAA rule violation? And I'm not joking. Like I'm dead serious. It might be possible that they have some rule that says if you are invited to a government-funded award ceremony that's approved by the NCAA, you're allowed to go and participate in the event. But it might also say you are not allowed to, engage. For instance, Trump had Trump University, so it might say you're not allowed to engage or receive any gifts from any associates of other universities while at that event. So this might be a violation. I don't know.
God, I didn't even think about that. And yeah, I'll agree that the NCAA is a corrupt joke. But I really do like the first point you made, though, which is to focus on the right stuff with Trump, right? Focus on the real stuff and not the stuff that doesn't matter. And this is something I have to say. Like, I do see liberals getting frustrated. Like, people feel like there's nothing we can do to get out of this situation, right? Times are changing, but we'll see what happens. But then people get frustrated and want to lash out, right? They attack Trump's appearance. They attack, Sarah Huckabee Sanders' appearance and things like that. And that's just not useful. That just puts you into Trump's category and doesn't help us out. So let's focus on the important things.
Don't like even getting into that. I think I'm not saying, for instance, like you're saying, like don't attack his appearance or whatever.
Yeah, there's no reason to attack his appearance.
I'm not saying that's even. I don't approve of it because I think the problem is you should always ask yourself, and this was actually a very Obama thing that I think you'd probably agree with. When Obama was like expanding executive powers, and we're like, it's fine, he's Obama, and all you have to do is raise your hand and say, yeah, what happens when Obama's not the one behind the wheel? And I'm by the way, for those that don't follow him, Adam Todd Brown, a fantastic follow. It's a D. It's only one D. So Adam Todd, TOD. He does the Unpops opinion, the unpopular opinion. It's Unpops on Twitter. Great podcast to follow. He has his own podcast network. So he predicted, like he didn't predict Trump. He basically said people weren't taking Trump seriously enough, and there was a very real path to Trump getting elected. And this was back in the day, but because we've talked this before, Brian, this was before even Nate Silver turned. So people give Nate Silver a lot of credit for finally going, the polls aren't looking good. This was when Nate Silver was still writing articles. It was like why Trump is going to burn out and, our primary is going to be normal, because he was still writing that very early in the day.
Yep.
So Adam Todd Brown was doing that. But yeah, it's kind of going, he's talked about, sorry, I forgot where I was with Adam Todd Brown. I completely forgot. But yeah, I don't necessarily, the we go low, they go high, all that, or other way around. And, I can't get back. Adam Todd Brown was saying people not being as concerned with stuff Obama was doing because Obama was in charge. And now that Trump's in charge, it's a real issue. It's the same thing where when you're using an attack, ask yourself, is this attack, does it accomplish anything? So I'm not even saying, when you're saying don't attack this way, I'm not even saying that's necessarily wrong. I'm going to back off from that. But I'm saying, is the attack what does it accomplish? And then also, more importantly, which gets weird, how is that attack going to be used in future? I've seen some really good think pieces, or even just like tweet storms about like SNL, about how SNL basically gives a lot of ammunition to Republicans to use, basically saying, don't joke about that. And it's like SNL likes to think, oh, we're taking down the Republicans doing this. And it's like, no, what you are actually doing is using an ineffective attack that not only is it ineffective, now what you've done, for instance, the person's example I saw was with Sarah Palin. By having Tina Fey, the first skit Tina Fey did of Sarah Palin, she just repeated word for word what Sarah Palin said. That was the quote unquote joke.
And she looked so similar. She looked almost identical to her, which is one thing I should point out.
It was Tina Fey can do a really good Sarah Palin impression. And then when Tina Fey would make fun of Sarah Palin, you would get essentially fake news, right? You would get fake quotes that people would now quote to Sarah Palin. And now you come back and say, Sarah Palin didn't say I can see, I didn't realize this either. So that shows how effective it was. Sarah Palin didn't say I can see Russia from my home. That was Tina Fey. So now Tina Fey, now that supposed attack you thought that was useful by insulting Sarah Palin's intelligence is now worthless because you're saying She didn't say that. Tina Fey said that. You're an idiot for quoting the wrong stats to me. So I think to the same point, when you're attacking Donald Trump for serving a bunch of college students that aren't allowed, like that's the thing, they're top tier athletes, right? So they're not allowed to eat McDonald's. By serving a bunch of top tier college athletes McDonald's and people saying, oh my God, can you believe he served at McDonald's? A bunch of people are going to go, I like McDonald's. And a bunch of like athletes are going to go, oh, hell yeah, on my cheat day, I use McDonald's. And I've even seen a lot of athletes, I think Michael Phelps says that it's like when you lose a bunch of calories, sometimes you're just like, I just go to McDonald's to get the calories back. So I think in this case, I agree. I'm being the boring middle of the road, goes either way, but I agree in this take.
Oh, good. I won't be boring. I actually want to disagree with your last point, even though you were trying to agree with me. I know that's so unfair, isn't it? But here's why I disagree on that. So in terms of giving Trump and his surrogates ammunition to attack, I don't think what you say matters at all. They're just going to move the goalposts no matter what. So I think what we're talking about here specifically is the civility debate, right? Like if Trump's being so uncivil, how civil should, mainstream Americans be? And here's the problem. No matter what you do, he's just still going to continue his attacks. If people say, oh, Nancy Pelosi's not the best, she could go away because she's a weakness. I'm not the biggest Nancy Pelosi fan necessarily, but if she did just go away, he would just pick another Nancy Pelosi to attack, right? It just doesn't matter. So reality doesn't matter to his attacks.
Well, so in this case, I actually agree, because what I'm saying, what you're saying is, I was saying 2 points, is ask yourself how effective that attack is, and ask yourself.
Yeah, then maybe we do agree.
I don't think you're giving Trump any ammunition with the thing, but I'm saying I think attacking McDonald's is completely ineffective. I think if your goal was to insult Trump or insult Trump supporters, it's ineffective, because a bunch of people, myself included, and like Nate Silver too, are just going to shrug your shoulders and go, that's not an insult. If you start saying, like I said, my take was, if Trump can't even properly cater a meal for the best football team or whatever, however high they're ranked in the USA, how can we expect them to be prepared for, foreign dignitaries? That makes a lot more sense. And in fact, you could have even gone with the football angle and just said, he's disrespecting the great state of Texas or something. But they did, the attack they did was, oh my God, he does this cheap thing. And we noticed that a lot. The calling people simpletons. I think you were actually making me crystallize my thoughts on this issue, Brian, because I do think tone policing and civility never does it for me. But the effectiveness point, and yeah, when you try and just insult people as simpletons, it just does not work to anybody.
Yeah, because those people are getting their ass kicked right now by the people they're insulting, for one. But here's my real point on this, which is I don't like how, people in the center or even the left are, worried about how things will look politically or how it'll play in 2020. Like 2020 is just so far away from now.
That's such a basketball. Well, we've said that if someone in
it's a very good analogy to basketball. But no, I was going to say is, you can't look ahead to 2020 and you can't worry about how things are going to play in the future. Why don't you just say and do the correct things? So, like, for example, right now, the Democrats just took control of the House, right? It's a very popular thing in, New York Times, Washington Post, cable news or whatever to say, oh, what should the Democrats do? Should they worry about investigating Trump too much or talking about impeachment too much? That might be bad for them politically. And that's just ludicrous. They should follow the evidence and they should investigate exactly how much the evidence says. And anything different is just absurd to me. So, yeah, don't just do stuff or say stuff because you think the other side will react in a certain way. Just do the right thing. Spike Lee got that right.
All right, I'll take it. So I'm glad I can always bait you on the Warriors and I can always bait you on politics. So that's fun. But anyway, that has been our show. Oh yeah, your shout out, by the way, Brian, keeping on the NCAA theme. I'll use my shout out first, which is a similar theme. So it's to Maori, I believe we're saying that right, Davenport. I actually meant to talk about this last week, but the full saga, and I'm not going to get the school names or whatever right. But essentially, she got sent a check by USA Basketball that she wasn't supposed to. She reported it and returned it and then got ruled ineligible as a high school player for whatever reason. And then basically the administrator did is like, well, I made a mistake, but it's really hard to correct. So luckily, a judge has allowed her to return to play high school basketball. And the good news I've heard is that this was done in a way for her to actually play, because another method would be to just let the clock run out, right? To basically make the correct ruling, but by the time the ruling is made, she can't go back and play. But, just to the same point we're making, fuck the NCAA. It's a sham of an organization that even if you were going to believe its purpose was to help student athletes either learn or be student athletes, it works against them. It is not. It is only working for the money. Bullshit. We hate it. It's corrupt. It's horrible. It should go away. That's what we got.
Yeah, my shout out is to our Heisman Award winner, Kyler Murray. He's already been drafted by the Oakland A's in baseball, and he's now entered the NFL draft. That was a big controversy. And we're going to go to Kevin Draper, who's, our heart and soul, maybe, I don't know, on this. And Kevin Draper says, maybe he just likes football more, but it's not hard to see this as baseball's economic model, reaping what it sows. His follow-up tweet to that is, baseball players were already squeezed on the front end. Now even stars are getting squeezed on the back end too, and the game struggled to create household names. So Kevin Draper thinks Kyler Murray is smart for going to the NFL. Well,
and yeah, to what he's saying there, like I remember Mike Trout, I think he was MVP and was making like $1 million a year. Basically, we've said before, anybody that believes the myth of the NBA, NFL, NHL, all the drafts, right? And basically it started in the NFL, that the draft serves any purpose other than wage suppression is fooling themselves. That is all it exists for, and that's what's happening here. So essentially, with Major League Baseball's draft, Kevin Draper is absolutely right, where it's saying, why does he want to make little money to go play baseball when he could make a lot more money playing football? Now we could say, worry about your health and all that jazz, but he's
got to worry season to season, right? He might not never make it big.
Exactly. And then also the bigger point that I love that Kevin Draper said in that tweet is that, baseball to make big names, you should attract the talent. And we're basically noticing that the draft can actually work against players doing that, because it's going, should I play football or baseball? Well, in baseball, if I'm draft 20th and I'm in a minor league team, I make $1 million a year, and then I have to go to arbitration. I might not get anything, whereas I might be able to actually get some guaranteed money in football. Yeah, basically, in all the sports, we think it would be better, including for popularity, if they basically abolish the draft and just let teams to bid on players. Because, for instance, Anthony Davis, I brought this example up many times, he's one of the most dynamic, best players in NBA history. He is in New Orleans, which is a horrible basketball market. And additionally, if he had been drafted if the Lakers had just given him a max contract right out of college, is there any doubt that he would have helped them win sooner and that would have been a bigger deal? And then, of course, you like Kevin Draper said, right, you household names, right? So it's like the draft does not help the leagues, and it is a big myth that it does. And it's so same point, Brian. Fuck the NCAA, fuck the draft.
All right, those are all my shout-outs.
Throwing all the shade. All right, well, this has been the Boxscore Geeks Show. If you find us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every week, twitch.tv/nerd numbers, usually on Mondays, sometime around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can catch the recaps of the show on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. We have iTunes and Stitcher Show. I forget if I said that, the Boxscore Geeks Show. And I've been your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. I almost said Boxscore Brian. And then, of course, you can find Brian on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. That's been our show. Have a good one. And hopefully the Nuggets will retain the Western Conference next week.